She lost the love of her life to cancer. So when she found love again online, it felt like a miracle, a second chance, a promise of forever. But within 2 years, she'd lose everything: her savings, her peace, and then her life. This is the story of how love became a lie, and how that lie became deadly. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Margaret Sullivan was 57 years old when she decided to try again. For 24 years, she'd been married to David, her college sweetheart. They built a life together in the small riverside town of Riverdale, Illinois. He was her everything, her anchor, her constant. But cancer took him from her in 2017. The grief was crushing. Friends worried she'd never recover. But Margaret was stronger than people thought. She moved to a charming house overlooking the bluffs. She adopted a golden retriever named Charlie. She worked part-time at a local boutique, golfed on weekends, and slowly, carefully, learned how to smile again. But something was missing. Not the big things, her daughter Emma would later say. Margaret had friends. She had hobbies. She had purpose. What she didn't have was someone to call at the end of the day, someone to share the small moments with, someone who made her feel seen. So in October 2018, Margaret did what millions of people do. She signed up for an online dating site. It felt safe, modern. She could take her time, meet people from the comfort of her own home, and maybe, just maybe, find companionship again. She never imagined it would lead her to the edge of ruin, or that it would end with her body floating in the Mississippi River, hundreds of miles from home. His name was Stephen Clark. At least, that's what his profile said. He was handsome in that unassuming way, salt and pepper hair, kind eyes, a warm smile. He said he was a Swedish businessman who'd lived in the United States for years. He was a widower, too. He understood loss. He understood loneliness. And from the very first message, he understood Margaret. They started talking in October. By November, they were exchanging phone calls. His voice was calm, confident, reassuring. He asked about her life, her late husband, her dreams for the future. He shared his own stories, tragedies he'd endured, business ventures he was passionate about, and he was interested in everything about her. Within 12 days, Margaret sent him an email that read, "My heart is ready for you." She signed it, "Love you, Stephen. You're in my heart forever." Her friends noticed the change immediately. Margaret seemed lighter, happier. She talked about Stephen constantly, how smart he was, how kind, how much they had in common. But there were things she didn't tell her friends, like the fact that Stephen never wanted to meet in person. He always had a reason, a business trip, a family emergency, timing that just never worked out. And then there were the requests. Small at first. He needed help with a business deal, just a little cash to move things forward. She'd get it back, he promised, with interest. Margaret sent the money. She trusted him. But the requests didn't stop. They grew. Larger amounts, more urgent deadlines. He told her about investment opportunities, accounts that needed funding, wire transfers that had to happen immediately, or the deal would fall through. Margaret's savings started to disappear. 75,000 here, 100,000 there. And every time she hesitated, Stephen knew exactly what to say. He reminded her of their connection, their future together, how much he loved her, how much he needed her. Margaret's neighbor, a woman named Claire, started to worry. She'd see Margaret on the phone in the driveway, pacing, looking stressed. One day, Claire asked her if everything was okay. Margaret smiled and said yes. But Claire didn't believe her. Neither did Emma, Margaret's daughter. Emma lived 2 hours away, but she called her mom regularly. And over time, she noticed changes. Her mother seemed distracted, evasive. She'd cancel plans at the last minute. She stopped talking about Stephen as much, but Emma could tell something was wrong. What none of them knew was that Margaret was terrified. The man she thought she loved wasn't who he claimed to be, and by the time she realized it, it was too late to walk away. Margaret was living two lives. On the surface, she was the woman everyone knew, friendly, independent, putting the pieces back together after loss. But behind closed doors, she was unraveling. Stephen's demands had become relentless. It wasn't just about sending money anymore. He needed her to do things. Open bank accounts in her name, set up fake companies, receive wire transfers from other people and send them to him. Margaret knew it was wrong. She tried to stop. Multiple times she told Stephen she couldn't do this anymore. But every time she tried to pull away, he'd respond with something that kept her hooked. Sometimes it was love, sweet words, promises of their future together. Other times it was pressure, deadlines, emergencies. You have to do this, or everything falls apart. And then there were the threats. Subtle at first, but there. Veiled references to consequences, to things she didn't want to think about. Margaret felt trapped. She'd lost almost everything. Her retirement savings, the money David had left her, the financial security she'd worked her whole life to build. She was broke, ashamed, and terrified. She couldn't tell anyone. How could she explain that she'd given $1.5 million to a man she'd never met? That she'd helped him move money she suspected came from other victims? That she'd broken the law because she'd been too scared, too lonely, too desperate to say no? So she hid it. She smiled at her neighbors. She worked at the boutique. She walked Charlie by the river. And every night she came home to a nightmare she couldn't escape. In the summer of 2020, federal investigators began looking into the money trails connected to Stephen's scams. They discovered Margaret's involvement. On August 7, 2020, Emma received a voicemail. It was from a federal agent. The message was brief, professional, detached. Your mother may have been involved in a fraud scam. As a victim. Emma's hands shook as she tried calling her mother. No answer. She called again, and again. Nothing. She drove to her mother's house, her heart pounding the entire way. When she arrived, the front door was unlocked. Charlie was there, confused and hungry, but Margaret was gone. Her car was missing. Her phone was off, and in a filing cabinet buried beneath old tax documents, Emma found a letter. It was undated, handwritten, and it was addressed to her. The letter was only a few paragraphs long, but every word felt like a knife. You were right in your judgment of me, it began. I've been living a double life this past year. It has left me broke and broken. Yes, it involves Stephen, the man I met through online dating. I tried to stop this many times, but I knew I would end up dead. Emma read it over and over, trying to make sense of it. Her mother had known she was in danger. She'd known something terrible was going to happen, but she hadn't reached out. She hadn't asked for help. Why? Emma reported her mother missing immediately. Police issued alerts. Search teams were organized. Margaret's car was a white Honda SUV with Illinois plates. Someone had to have seen it. 2 days later, on August 9th, a couple out fishing on the Mississippi River near Canton, Missouri, made a grim discovery. A body in the water. It was Margaret. She'd been found 250 miles from her home. Her car was discovered miles away, parked on a boat ramp in a small river town. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no evidence of foul play. The autopsy came back quickly. Cause of death, drowning. But the manner of death? That was left undetermined. Some investigators believed it was suicide. The shame, the financial loss, the fear of criminal charges. It all added up. But Emma didn't believe it. Neither did Claire, Margaret's neighbor. Margaret's last text message to Claire, sent just hours before she disappeared, had said, "All is good." Does someone who's about to take their own life send a message like that? And there were other questions. Why had Margaret driven so far from home? Why was her phone turned off in the hours before her death? Why was her car found in a completely different location from her body? Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her mother hadn't died by her own hand. She believed the scammers had driven her to a point where she felt she had no choice but to comply. And maybe, just maybe, they'd been involved in her death, but proving it was another matter entirely. Stephen Clark didn't exist. Federal agents traced the photos on his profile back to a doctor in Chile. A real person with a real life who had nothing to do with the scam. His photos had been stolen, his identity hijacked. The emails Margaret had received were traced back to Ghana and Nigeria. The phone calls came from numbers registered in West Africa. Stephen wasn't one person. He was a network, a criminal enterprise. Investigators uncovered the structure of the scam. There were the masterminds, the people who created the fake profiles and built the relationships. There were the communicators, the people who sent the emails and made the calls, keeping the victims engaged. And then there were the money mules, the people on the ground in the United States who received the stolen funds and moved them through the system. Margaret had sent her first payment of $75,000 to a group of people living in the Chicago suburbs. 3 people, 2 Nigerian nationals named Samuel Oho and Anthony Nwiki, and a woman named Patricia Lindbergh. Patricia claimed she was a victim too. She said she'd been dating Anthony, who told her he was a doctor. She said she didn't know the money was stolen. She thought she was helping her boyfriend, but investigators didn't believe her. The recordings they made, the evidence they collected, all pointed to her knowing involvement. In November 2023, Samuel and Anthony were sentenced to federal prison for wire fraud and money laundering. Patricia was sentenced in January 2025. At both sentencing hearings, Emma stood in front of the court and read a victim impact statement. Her voice shook as she spoke about her mother, about the woman she was before the scam, about the pain her family would carry forever. "They took so much away from me," Emma said. "They took everything away from her. My family will never get that time back." The judge acknowledged the seriousness of the crime, the suffering of the victims. But for Emma, no sentence felt like enough. Because the people who had directly manipulated her mother, the people behind Stephen Clark, were still out there. Free, untouchable, operating from countries where American law enforcement had little reach. People always ask the same question: how could someone fall for this? How could a smart, educated woman send $1.5 million to a man she'd never met? The answer is more complicated than most people want to believe. Romance scammers aren't amateurs, they're professionals. They study their victims, they build psychological profiles, they know exactly what to say and when to say it. Margaret was vulnerable in a very specific way. She wasn't naive, she wasn't stupid, but she was lonely. And loneliness, especially after loss, creates a kind of hunger, a need for connection that can override logic. Stephen didn't just ask for money. He built a relationship first. He spent months earning her trust. He made her feel seen, valued, loved. By the time he started asking for money, she was already emotionally invested, and once she'd sent the first payment, he had leverage. Scammers call it the sunk cost fallacy. Once a victim has given money, they're more likely to keep giving, because admitting you've been scammed means admitting you've been a fool, and that's a kind of pain people will do almost anything to avoid. Margaret knew, on some level, that Stephen wasn't real. The letter she left for Emma proves that. She knew she was in danger. She knew she was being used. But she couldn't stop. Maybe she was ashamed. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she thought if she just did what he asked one more time, it would all be over. Experts say that by the end, many romance scam victims aren't motivated by love anymore. They're motivated by fear. Fear of losing what they've already invested. Fear of facing the consequences of what they've done. Fear of what the scammer might do if they don't comply. Margaret wasn't weak. She was trapped. And the people who trapped her knew exactly what they were doing. Margaret's story isn't unique. In 2023 alone, nearly 70,000 Americans reported being victims of romance scams. The total financial loss? $1.3 billion. And those are just the people who came forward. Experts believe the real number is much higher because shame keeps people silent, embarrassment, fear of judgment, fear of being called stupid. The Federal Trade Commission says romance scams result in higher financial losses than almost any other type of online fraud. Victims lose an average of $4,400, but many, like Margaret, lose everything: their savings, their homes, their sense of self, and in rare cases, their lives. Law enforcement agencies are overwhelmed. The scammers operate from countries where prosecution is difficult. They use fake identities, encrypted communications, cryptocurrency. They move fast, and by the time investigators catch up, they've already moved on to new victims. Banks and dating sites have tried to respond. Match.com, the site where Margaret met Stephen, says it spends $125 million a year on fraud prevention. They claim they take down 44 fake profiles every minute. But it's not enough, because the scammers are always one step ahead. They're sophisticated, organized, ruthless, and they're targeting the most vulnerable people they can find: widows, divorcees, people who've been hurt and are looking for a second chance, people like Margaret. After her mother's death, Emma quit her job. She couldn't go back to normal. Not when her mother's story was still being ignored. She started speaking publicly about what happened. She went to community groups, law enforcement agencies, women's organizations. She shared the details of her mother's case. She showed people the emails, the wire transfer records, the letter her mother had left behind. Her message was simple: this can happen to anyone. Don't let shame keep you silent. Don't let embarrassment stop you from asking for help. If you think someone you love is being scammed, speak up, even if they push you away, even if they don't want to hear it, because the alternative is unthinkable. Emma also became an advocate for policy change. She's pushing for stronger laws around online fraud, for better coordination between law enforcement agencies, for more resources to help victims recover. She's calling on dating sites to do more, to verify identities, to flag suspicious behavior earlier, to take responsibility for the predators using their platforms, and she's asking banks to be more vigilant, to recognize the signs of a romance scam, to intervene before it's too late. For Emma, this isn't just about justice for her mother, it's about preventing the next tragedy. The next letter left in a filing cabinet, the next body found in a river. She knows she can't bring her mother back, but she believes she can save someone else's. And that's what keeps her going. Margaret Sullivan was 57 years old when she died. She was a mother, a friend, a woman who'd survived loss and tried to find love again. She wasn't stupid, she wasn't careless, she was human, and she was targeted by people who knew exactly how to exploit that humanity. Her daughter Emma believes the people behind Stephen Clark are responsible for her mother's death. Whether they physically harmed her or simply drove her to the point where she felt she had no other option, the result is the same. Margaret is gone. Her story should make us angry, but it should also make us think. How many of us know someone who's lonely, who's searching for connection, who might be vulnerable to this exact kind of manipulation? And if we saw the warning signs, would we speak up? Or would we stay silent, afraid of offending them, afraid of being wrong? Margaret's neighbor Claire saw the signs. She asked if everything was okay. Margaret said yes. Claire didn't push. She wonders now if she should have. Emma saw the changes in her mother. She knew something was wrong, but she was 2 hours away. She didn't know how bad it had gotten until it was too late. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: trust your instincts. If something feels off, say something. If someone you love is acting differently, ask questions. Don't stop at the first answer. Dig deeper, be persistent. Be inconvenient if you have to. Because the alternative, as Emma knows all too well, is a loss that can never be undone. Margaret's story didn't have to end the way it did, and maybe, just maybe, by sharing it, we can make sure the next one doesn't either. If this story affected you, share it. Talk about it. Help someone else recognize the signs. And if you or someone you know is being targeted by a romance scam, report it to the FBI, to local police, to the dating site. Don't let shame keep you silent, because your voice might be the one that saves a life. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe. And remember, love shouldn't cost you everything.